Hello, everyone, and welcome to Past and Printed, the show where we take a look at a newspaper from today's date, but in a randomly selected city in a randomly selected year to see what people at the time were reading about and what was going on in their world. This episode takes us from eastern Canada to the east coast of the U.S., where we landed in my current state of residence, New Jersey. Specifically, we're looking at the Monday, June 28th, 1915 edition of the Perth Amboy Evening News from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Perth Amboy is actually very close to where I live, and I guess there's bound to be at least a few stories of places that I probably go by on a regular basis. The city is located in Middlesex County in what I think most people would call central New Jersey, although the definition of central Jersey and even its existence at all is a disputed topic in the Garden State. Although it is about 20 miles from Manhattan, Perth Amboy is separated from the borough of Staten Island only by the Arthur Kill River. The Lenape people referred to the area as Ompoge, which is varyingly translated as level ground or standing upright. Though the land was purchased by Bohemian explorer and New Amsterdam resident Augustine Hermann in 1651, the first European settlement of what is now Perth Amboy began in 1688. At this time, the original Lenape name had already been corrupted to Amboy, and the Perth was added to honor James Drummond, the Earl of Perth, who was one of the early proprietors of a company that purchased much of the land that is now New Jersey. The settlement of Perth Amboy was officially chartered on August 4th, 1718, and was chartered again by the New Jersey legislature on December 21st, 1784. From 1686 to 1702, Perth Amboy was the capital of the colony of East Jersey and alternated back and forth with Burlington, New Jersey, as the capital of the colony of New Jersey, until 1790, when Trenton became the state capital. During this time, the Perth Amboy City Hall was constructed, and although it has undergone multiple renovations since its completion in 1717, parts of the building are original and remains the oldest public building in continuous use in the United States. So it's kind of a City Hall of Theseus kind of a thing. From the 18th until the early 20th century, Perth Amboy also served as an important way station for people traveling from Philadelphia to New York, not least of all because it served as an important ferry crossing to Staten Island. As the city industrialized in the mid-1800s, waves of European immigrants arrived, primarily from Denmark, Poland, Hungary, Bohemia, Italy, Russia, and Austria. These days, the citizens are primarily Latino, with Puerto Rican and Dominican being the largest ancestries. Though the city experienced significant economic slowdown, there have been multiple revitalization projects since the 1990s, which have seen the redevelopment of downtown Perth Amboy, the waterfront, and an expansion of small businesses. The 1910 U.S. Census gives Perth Amboy's population as 32,121, and 41,707 as of the 1920 census, so I think we can assume that the population was somewhere in the middle 30,000s. Per the 2020 U.S. Census, the city was home to 55,436 people. As of the publishing date, the editor-in-chief of the paper was J. Logan Clevenger. The business manager was D.P. Olmsted, with branch offices in New York and Chicago, and a 10-page copy of the paper cost 10 cents. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into the Monday, June 28th, 1915 edition of the Perth Amboy Evening News. As I mentioned, this is our first 10-page paper, so I will try to be a little bit more succinct in my summarization than I usually am. It might be a little tough because page 1 is full of headlines. The first declares, "Will make more arrests in New Mexican conspiracy. Guard Huerta from escape." We are also told, Department of Justice plans energetic prosecution of all persons concerned. Will include Americans, some financial backers, and others who were said to have furnished arms for new revolution. So this is referring to the arrest of former Mexican president and dictator Victoriano Huerta and his co-conspirator revolutionary leader turned counter-revolutionary General Pascual Orozco on charges of violating U.S. neutrality laws. To briefly summarize, Huerta, who had overthrown Mexico's elected president Francisco Madero in 1913 and was himself deposed in July 1914, had been observed by U.S. Secret Service agents attached to the Justice Department meeting with German officials in New York. The purpose of these meetings was to obtain weapons and financial backing for an insurgency against the constitutionalist regime in Mexico. Germany was interested in funding this venture because they believed it would keep America's attention on its southern border and therefore away from the ongoing war in Europe. Orozco, who had one time fought against General Huerta, there was a lot of backstabbing in the Mexican Revolution, both literally and figuratively, but was now in Texas coordinating a group of counter-revolutionaries, including prominent Mexican expats, met up with Huerta, but the two were arrested near Newman, New Mexico by a group of U.S. Army soldiers and deputy U.S. Marshals. Generals Huerta and Orozco were charged with sedition as they were in the U.S., plotting a rebellion against a nation with which the U.S. was at peace. It probably didn't help that President Woodrow Wilson had refused to recognize the Huerta government as legitimate, had imposed an arms embargo against Mexico in 1913, and had a personal distaste for the man. As of June 28, 1915, Huerta and Orozco were out on bail, but essentially under house arrest. A related article further down the page notes that both Huerta and Orozco were being represented by the prominent El Paso law firm of Leo, McBrady, and Thomason, and that Special Agent Clifford Benkham is planning at least 4 more arrests, including of American citizens. Neither man would actually stand trial for these charges, however, as Orozco escaped house arrest on July 3rd and was killed by a posse led by U.S. Marshals on August 30th, 1915. The government alleged that Orozco and some compatriots were attempting to steal cattle, but many locals considered the circumstances of his death suspicious. Huerta would remain in U.S. custody and would die, probably of cirrhosis of the liver, on January 13th, 1916. From international conspiracies to a celebrity trial, the headline tells us, Thaw trial judge rebukes editors. Must not try case, he says, hinting contempt of court. Look for Evelyn. The Evelyn in question is actress and model Evelyn Nesbit, and the trial is actually the sanity hearing of Harry Kendall Thaw, who infamously murdered the architect Stanford White in 1906 by shooting him in the face at the conclusion of a stage show in Madison Square Garden. Specifically, the judge, Justice Hendricks, is warning the New York press to stop publishing pieces, quote, as to how the trial should be conducted and what evidence should and should not be introduced, unquote. Now, the murder of Stanford White has been covered quite thoroughly in numerous books, true crime podcasts, documentaries, etc., but just briefly, White, who was really one of the preeminent American architects of the late 18 and early 1900s, had been romantically involved with Nesbit, who had been married to Henry Thaw in 1905. Now, this affair did occur before Thaw and Nesbit were married. However, it also occurred when Evelyn was 15 or 16 years old, and likely after White had plied her with alcohol and drugs. For his part, Thaw had a history of mental illness and abuse towards his wife, and after 2 sensational trials, the first of which ended in a hung jury, he was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity and sentenced to be incarcerated for life at a mental hospital. However, as a multi-millionaire, Thaw had no intention of remaining in custody for the rest of his life, and immediately started a legal campaign to gain his freedom. This trial occurred while Evelyn was attempting to divorce her husband, basically on the grounds of being an abusive murderer. The piece also details the fact that Evelyn had fled to Canada with her son Jerome to a property owned by her dancing partner and later husband, Jack Clifford, in order to escape a subpoena to testify at the sanity hearings. Essentially, Evelyn was not only exhausted by the entire affair, but according to Clifford, quote, of course she does not believe he is of sound mind. It may be that if he is released, he will harm her, get her and Jerome if he can. He has never forgiven her for testifying before, unquote. The divorce did go through in 1915, and in July, Thaw would be declared sane and was released from the mental institution. Evelyn Nesbit would marry Jack Clifford in 1916, though they divorced in 1933. In a bizarre twist, Evelyn and Henry Thaw actually eventually reconciled somewhat. They were even photographed together in 1926, and when Thaw died in 1947, he left Evelyn $10,000, or about $150,000 in 2026. Like I said, there's tons of nonfiction and fictional media concerning this situation, and actually I feel like we'll probably end up covering a newspaper in the midst of the murder trial itself at some point in the future. In other international news, we have a collection of reports from Europe summarizing the latest developments in the ongoing Great War. Grand Duke Nicholas thwarted an attempt by an Austro-German force to pierce the Russian lines near Lemberg, now Lviv, Ukraine, though the Russians admitted they had retreated along a 30-mile front southeast of the city. A German fort and wireless station near Bukoba, German East Africa, now Tanzania, was destroyed by a British expedition from Uganda, according to an official statement. Italian aeroplanes bombarded the Austrian fortified seaport of Cattaro. Bombs are reported to have seriously damaged both the fortifications of the city and the docks. The crew of a British coasting steamer, the Lucina, which was sunk by a German U-boat, landed at Queenstown, now Cove, Ireland, having been picked up by a fishing trawler. German troops, after fierce fighting, have crossed the Dniester River between Bukajewicz and Charadau in Galicia, now Bukovici and Kodoriv, Ukraine. In France, the Germans have also bombarded French artillery near the Cathedral of Arras and captured a portion of the French trenches in the Argonne. However, in a report from London, it appears the Allies have had their own victories. The French frustrated an attempted German assault on the Oisane district, as well as on the heights of the Meuse River and in Lorraine. The fighting in Oisane was of unusual violence, where the Germans first cut through the French lines at Quinvière during a nighttime attack involving a barrage of hand grenades thrown into the French positions. The French met the assault with grenades of their own, as well as rifle and machine gun fire, which halted further German advances. A similarly fierce attack was launched by the Germans at Bagatelle in the Argonne, and though the Germans continued to advance through the evening of Saturday, June 26th, by Sunday they had been pushed back to their own trenches. The French also held off German attacks on their positions at Aracourt and Chalon. The Italians have captured an Austrian fortress on the heights of the Zeilenkofel, which is a peak in the Carnic Alps along the Austro-Italian border. In Russian Poland, the Russians have won an important battle, annihilating more than 1,000 Germans, besides setting naught all Germanic attacks on Galicia, which contradicts the earlier report of German success crossing the Dniester. Though, as a little note, I think the report of the German advance is likely the more accurate one, considering the Russians would be steadily pushed out of Galicia by German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman troops throughout the summer of 1915. In war-related news, the German reply to, quote, the second American note regarding the Lusitania will be handed to Ambassador Girard on July 4th, 5th, or 6th, unquote. This second note is the American response to Germany's defense of the sinking of the ocean liner RMS Lusitania, which was sunk by a U-boat on May 7, 1915, and resulted in the loss of nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. After the sinking, the Wilson administration issued a diplomatic note affirming the rights of Americans as citizens of an, at the time, neutral nation to travel on merchant ships of any nationality, and that submarines shouldn't be used against merchant vessels at all. The Germans responded, asserting that the Lusitania had been a legitimate target, carrying both Canadian troops and munitions. This is half true. The ship was carrying millions of .303 caliber rifle rounds, as well as thousands of shrapnel shell casings and percussion fuses. There were quite a few Canadians on board, but they were all civilians. In the second note, now awaiting a response, President Wilson rejected Germany's defenses of its submarine tactics. Wilson asserted that as the munitions carried by the Lusitania were non-explosive in nature, the cargo was not contraband per American law, and regardless was not a justification to take innocent lives. The paper speculates that the German response will be that, quote, submarines will not attack unarmed passenger ships carrying no contrabands, provided they bear the distinguishing marks, unquote. Most of the rest of the page is various local news items. Apparently, severe thunderstorms blew through the area on Sunday, June 27th, causing a variety of damage. In the farming districts, severe wind and hailstones, some as large as marbles, caused thousands of dollars worth of damage to corn, tomato, and lima bean crops in Middlesex County. Multiple small pleasure boats were tossed about, and although no one was severely injured, several boats had to be later towed to shore by larger craft once the winds had died down, including a man, woman, and 3 children, who were rescued by the fishing steamboat Samuel W. McKeever after their motorboat lost power off Sandy Hook. Also, Harvey Wilson and Frank Roberts, described by the Evening News as quote-unquote 2 prominent young men of this city, were rescued by lifesavers from Midland Beach, Staten Island, when their small boat capsized in the waves. Luckily, Wilson and Roberts were less than 250 yards from shore and were promptly rescued. There was at least one severe injury resulting from the storms, however. Mrs. Mary Kessler of Woodbridge, New Jersey, was severely burned when lightning struck her home. Apparently, the bolt tore a hole in the house, striking Mrs. Kessler, who was holding her 5-month-old baby in her arms at the time. The child was uninjured, but Mary was burned severely from her hips down. Mr. Kessler quickly came to his wife's assistance, putting out the flames and calling for Dr. I.T. Spencer. There is no word on her current condition. In local crime news, John Catella, 21 years old, who was charged last week with carrying a concealed weapon, is the same man who tried to shoot Patrolman Hartman of the Perth Amboy Police Department in 1913. Catella is being held in the county jail in lieu of $1,000 bail, which is about $33,000 these days. Nathan Benowitz of 180 Fayette Street was fined $10, or about $330 in 2026, stemming from a charge by Health Officer William J. Wilsey that Benowitz was selling fish that was, quote, decayed and unfit for human consumption, unquote. County authorities are investigating the death of Christopher Duria, who died on Saturday, June 26th, from injuries received when he drove his car into the canal at Albany Street, New Brunswick. Mr. Durea's daughter, Miss May Durea, lost her life after being run down by an automobile near Princeton about a year previous. Frederick Witowski, who was also in Mr. Durea's car, was not seriously injured and is recovering at St. Peter's Hospital. On Saturday night, the aforementioned Patrolman Hartman arrested 2 men, John Uzar and Bramislos Black, both of Hartford Street, after a brawl on State Street near Hall Avenue. Uzar had a cut over his eye, which Dr. E.K. Hansen treated with 3 stitches. Both men were locked up for the night and fined $15 each by Recorder Pickersgill, $15 being just about $495 these days. Moving away from crime, City Playground Supervisor R.V. Afferbach will oversee the formal opening of Perth Amboy's first public park playground on Wednesday, June 30th. The park will actually be open to the public today, that is June 28th. The ceremony will include speeches by Mayor Fred Garrettson, Alderman John J. Clark, folk dancing in costume by a number of children, a volleyball tournament, and foot races. The festivities will commence at 2 p.m. An estimated 5,000 people attended St. Mary's Carnival in Center Street, which was 4 days long and concluded on Saturday. The carnival included dancing to music provided by Morrissey's Orchestra, carnival games such as Ring the Duck and Swatting the Villain, and booths selling, quote, fancy articles and refreshments, unquote. The U.S. Navy destroyer Nicholson will be on display in the waters off of Perth Amboy on July 4th and 5th. Mayor Garrettson is preparing a reception for the officers and crew. And finally, funeral services for John Coughlin Sr. of 695 Elizabeth Street will be held at his late residence at 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, followed by a solemn mass of requiem at St. Mary's Church at 10. Interment will be at St. Mary's Cemetery. And with that, if you can believe it, we come to the end of page 1. Let's continue on, shall we, to page 2. Starting off on page 2, Assemblyman Arthur A. Quinn, President of the State Federation of Labor, and Henry F. Hilfers, Secretary of the State Federation of Labor, are denying charges that they have not served the best interests of organized labor. Incidentally, Quinn then censured the Mercer County Central Labor Union, to whom he attributed the charges. Basically, Quinn is accused of appearing before a state Senate hearing on a proposed state constabulary bill and stating that organized labor was not entirely opposed to the bill, and Hilfers is accused of telling Governor James Fairman Fielder's office that the labor unions didn't care one way or another whether the bill was passed. State constabulary here meaning a state police force, which New Jersey did not have at the time. Labor unions were in fact fiercely opposed to this bill, as state-controlled police forces like the Pennsylvania State Police had been used as strikebreakers and would be used to intimidate workers during labor disputes. The bill would in fact be defeated, and the New Jersey State Police were not formed until 1921. There's an article praising Miss Rolls-Bolke, a newly appointed city health nurse who will commence her duties in the Dublin section of Perth Amboy on July 1st. We're told Miss Bolke is a graduate of the local city hospital school, is fluent in English, Polish, German, and Slavish, which was a common term at the time for Slovak. Nurse Bolke will work alongside Nurse Camille Harmson and will visit the homes of newly born babies to help instruct the mothers in, quote, the care of the children, proper nutriment, ventilation, and clothing, unquote. The wife of Henry Reget, a former piano player at a motion picture theater in Perth Amboy, has filed for divorce. Mr. Reget apparently gained national attention the previous year when he claimed to have spontaneously lost the ability to speak. He then gained further attention when he summoned a young girl, Miss Marion Marshall of 328 Watson Avenue, from a Sunday school classroom and, quote, persuaded her to join him in a flight to New York, unquote. Reget was then pursued through several states and eventually arrested by County Detective Peltier on July 6, 1914. He was charged with sending obscene letters through the mail to the Marshall girl and white slavery, meaning sex trafficking, but the case fell apart and Reget was released. These exploits are being used as evidence by Reget's wife, the former Ethel D. Telford, to justify the divorce. I did do a little extra research. I'm positive I've identified the correct people, and the situation is a little less nefarious than it might seem. In 1914, Marion Marshall would have been 18 years old, and Henry Reget would have been 21 or 22. Also, the wording of white slavery laws of the day, most infamously the Mann Act of 1910, that's man with two N's, were notoriously vague and frequently used to prosecute people for activities that authorities might consider immoral but were usually between consenting adults. For example, Jack Johnson, heavyweight boxing champion, who I mentioned in our last episode, was charged with Mann Act violations in 1912, ostensibly because his soon-to-be wife Lucille Cameron was a prostitute, but the charges were more likely pursued because Johnson was black and Cameron was white. So was Henry Reget a sleaze? Yeah, probably. Was he a human trafficking sex predator? Probably not. And just to put a lid on this tangent, Ethel successfully divorced Henry and was remarried to Samuel Zebes on April 16th, 1917. She passed away on August 2nd, 1956. I wasn't able to find a ton more on Marion Marshall other than that as of the 1920 U.S. Census, she was still living at 328 Watson with her mother and brothers and was working as a machine operator. As for Henry Reget, he continued to work as a pianist. In 1917, per his draft card, he was working in Kansas City, Missouri, but still listed a New York City home address, and claimed he was exempt from the draft because of quote-unquote apoplectic fits. It doesn't seem that he ever remarried. His World War II draft card lists his sister Joanna as his point of contact, and Henry passed away on November 20th, 1952 in the Bronx. The 7th session of the New Jersey Library Commission's summer school has come to an end, and its closing exercise was held on Friday night. The students at this month-long annual course must be, quote, under appointment in a New Jersey library at the time they are admitted to the school, unquote. The session included a number of special lectures on the different phases of library management, so I believe this is like a continuing education course for librarians, and it looks like there are about 24 participants from around New Jersey. One of the main columns on this page is devoted to an obituary for Mr. James B. Toomey, Assistant Superintendent of Plant Number 2 at the Atlantic Terracotta Company, who died suddenly on Saturday night following an attack of, quote, acute indigestion while attending the Carnival of St. Mary's Parish, unquote. Apparently, Mr. Toomey had just eaten a plate of ice cream in St. Mary's Hall when he, quote, became unconscious and was removed to the convent, unquote. Dr. Frank C. Henry was quickly called for and worked to revive the stricken man, but without success. So I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure the ice cream was coincidental. Acute indigestion was a term frequently used back in the day for a number of medical incidents, most frequently severe cardiac events, which would manifest with severe chest pain, not unlike indigestion. Mr. Toomey was the first president of St. Mary's Holy Name Society, was very active in the parish, and was a member of the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic Benevolent Legion, and the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks, Perth Amboy Lodge number 784. He had worked in the terracotta industry since the age of 19, first for the Perth Amboy Terracotta Company, which merged with the Atlantic Terracotta Company several years previous. James Toomey was born in Perth Amboy to the late Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Toomey, who had immigrated from Ireland. He is survived by a sister, Mrs. Michael Draper, with whom he resided. He was 54 years old. The Holy Name Society will meet Tuesday evening at St. Mary's and march to the deceased's residence at 124 Gordon Street. Shifting tone, in tennis news, Woodbridge native Harold A. Throckmorton lost in the, quote, battle for the championship honors of the Middle States, unquote, to reigning champion Carl H. Baer on Saturday, and lost in doubles along with Lindley Dullum to Baer and Theodore R. Pell. Young Throckmorton did take Baer to the full 5 sets, however, winning 2 out of 5 with scores of 6-4, 7-5, 4-6, 4-6, and 6-3. For fellow Titanic nerds out there, you'll probably recognize the name Carl Baer. Baer, who was 26 at the time of the sinking, had booked passage on Titanic while attempting to court fellow first-class passenger Helen Newsom, who was a friend of Baer's sister. During the sinking, Baer, Helen's mother Sally, stepfather Richard Beckwith, and friends Edwin and Gertrude Kimball were ushered into a lifeboat by J. Bruce Ismay and thus survived the sinking. Baer was part of the committee that organized to honor the bravery of Captain Arthur Rostron, captain of the rescue ship Carpathia, and her crew. Carl and Helen actually married less than a year after the sinking and went on to have 4 children. Again, after that little tangent, there's a lot of little short pieces. I'll just probably read them mostly verbatim. The winner of the State Street contest to decide which young woman will become Queen of the Independence Day Carnival will be announced tomorrow, June 29th. In further World War news, the Turks have apparently forced Russian troops in the Dardanelles front to retreat. The Ottomans have also bombarded Russian ships near Gaba Tepe, damaging a destroyer and igniting munitions on a transport ship. In Camden, New Jersey, a young woman, Mrs. Filomeno Russo, aged 21, fell under a passing express train and was fatally injured. The baby, held by Mrs. Russo, escaped without any injuries. A Woodbridge man, John Olar, charged with disorderly conduct, was sentenced to 15 days in the county jail at New Brunswick. Frederick Rogers, who pleaded guilty to a charge of horse stealing last week, was taken to the state prison by Sheriff Houghton to serve a 2 to 7-year sentence. Soren Palmblad of 323 Prospect Street was arrested due to a complaint by Mr. and Mrs. Myers of 310 Prospect Street, who charged that Palmblad had threatened to kill them, grossly insulted Mrs. Myers, and otherwise abused the couple. The case will be postponed until Wednesday to secure witnesses. In a dispatch from Detroit, William Leffler of Detroit confessed to Crown Attorney Roth in Windsor, Ontario, that he, Leffler, and 2 other men had conspired to dynamite Canadian factories and public buildings. Specifically, the men were targeting facilities that produce munitions for the British Army, including the Peabody factory, which had been successfully dynamited the previous week. The accused men were alleged to be German sympathizers. Senor Don Luis Sanfuentes, previously the Chilean Secretary of Finance and Minister of Justice, will be proclaimed the winner of Chile's recent presidential elections. Captain Joseph West of the Philadelphia Railroad tug Radnor, whose home port is at South Amboy, saved the life of Carlotta Pianchetta on Saturday night in New York Harbor. Captain West was piloting his vessel when he heard a scream and changed course to find a woman struggling in the water. The woman, once aboard, refused to give her address or explain how she got in the water. It is said by someone, the paper doesn't say who, that she threw herself overboard from a ferry boat bound for Hoboken. And finally, this is a humorous supposed dispatch from Paris titled "Germans Sell to British, Work Overtime to Supply English Army with Helmets." A good example of the fact that Germans who are residents of foreign countries are not allowing sentiment to interfere with their business is contained in a letter just received from Spain. According to this letter, a German-owned factory is manufacturing cork helmets for the British Army and is working overtime. And with that little goof, we come to the end of page 2, and we'll move on to page 3. So the first 3 columns of page 3 are devoted to news from Staten Island, all seeming to come from the Tottenville neighborhood, apparently, which makes sense because that's the neighborhood right across the Arthur Kill River from Perth Amboy. The first article is titled, "New Cadet Corps Organized Here. Leonard Waite, formerly captain of Westminster Cadets, will be instructor." We're told that 20 young men from St. Paul's Methodist Church on Amboy Avenue in Tottenville have started a new cadet organization to be run in connection with the church's outdoor club. James Lang, president of said outdoor club, announced that he had secured the services of Leonard Waite, formerly captain of the Westminster Cadets in Perth Amboy, quote, to act as drill master, and that he hoped the boys would make good and become a credit to the church as well as the community, unquote. There was also an election for temporary officers to serve until a permanent election in the fall. I'm not sure why you'd have to wait. If you're having an election, just have that be the election, but oh well. In those elections, W. Franklin Pepper was elected to the position of First Lieutenant, Willard Boyd to Second Lieutenant, and Earl Lang was elected Sergeant. The Cadet Corps will practice military drilling as well as participating in athletics and outdoor activities. So apparently church cadet organizations like this were fairly common in the early 1900s. They weren't affiliated with the military, but were kind of like a mix of a boys' club and youth militia. They would wear uniforms, practice military drills, as the article says, practice physical exercises, and leadership would have military titles. However, as the Boy Scouts, founded in 1910, grew in popularity, many of these church-affiliated organizations either merged with or formed scout troops of their own, which offered a similar experience but with less of a focus on overtly military activities. The next headline announces that Island Police win in tug of war. Patrolman Purdon gets third place in bicycle race at Carnival Saturday. Specifically, this is the team from the 13th Inspection District of the NYPD who won the tug of war contest at the Athletic Carnival held at the Brooklyn Jockey Club racetrack. The team consisted of Patrolman Charles Hall and Bernard Feist from the 99th Precinct, Patrolman Richard Gonud and Daniel Quinlan from the 81st Precinct, and Patrolman Charles Powell, James F. Kingston, Lewis Nelson, and Otto Drescher of the 80th Precinct. And Patrolman Drescher, who apparently weighed in at 285 pounds, which would have been very sizable back then, was the team's anchor. The team from Staten Island beat the team from the 2nd Inspection District of Manhattan in 5 minutes and 7 seconds, which is a better showing than the 4th Inspection District team, which stood up to the Staten Island Coppers for a total of 5 seconds. We're also told that Patrolman Hall is entered in the Fat Man's Race, which will be held next Saturday and is restricted to policemen weighing at least 230 pounds or more. As for the more traditionally athletic cops, Patrolman August F. Purdon of the 99th Precinct in Tottenville came in third place in the quarter-mile bicycle race, which entitles him to race for the championship this coming Saturday. Proceeds for this carnival are for the benefit of the children and widows of members of the police force killed in the performance of their duties. In further police-related news, 3 men, Camilo Garcia, Carlo Shonia, and Salvatore Gulza, had been locked up in the county jail on charge of robbing one John Olio of $29, that's $956 these days, and a hand valise plus contents valued at $15, or almost $495 these days. The men were arrested around 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night at 1048 Freshkill Road in Greenridge by detectives McKittrick, Lewis, and Graham. Oddly, the victim Olio is also locked up in the county jail as a material witness. That seems excessive, but okay. The trio of robbers were arraigned in the 1st District Court on Sunday and held on $1,000 bail each, again, $1,000 being about $33,000 these days. In media news, The Boss, a film which the paper refers to as a quote-unquote 5-part photo play, originally written for the stage by Edward Sheldon, is being screened at the Palace Theatre in Tottenville. Quote, "The story deals with the rise of a born fighter and politician to the position of political boss, and vividly points out the path along which he journeyed," unquote. Hilbrook Blinn and Alice Brady are featured in the leading roles. There are also some social snippets from the neighborhoods of Tottenville and Pleasant Plains, which include that the clam bake and outing of the William O'Brien Association was held yesterday at Charles Stark's Raritan Hotel Park and was a great success. Miss Ella Slight is visiting Mrs. Catherine Woodburn for a few days. Mrs. C. Hammond has returned from Delaware and is again at her home in Bloomingdale Avenue. And a tea for the benefit of the supper committee of the fair to be held by the Prince Bay Guild was held Saturday at the home of Mrs. George Doxey of Prince Bay. The affair was a great success and was largely attended. We've also got the scores from Sunday's National, American, and Federal League baseball games. In a National League doubleheader, the Chicago Cubs beat the Cincinnati Reds 4-1 in the first game, but lost 0-3 in the second. Pittsburgh at St. Louis was postponed due to rain. In the American League, the Chicago White Sox beat the St. Louis Browns, now the Baltimore Orioles, by a score of 4-3. And the Detroit Tigers absolutely demolished the Cleveland Indians with a final score of 12 runs to 2. And in the Federal League, which only existed as a major league from 1914 to 1915, the Newark Peppers squared off against the Kansas City Packers in another doubleheader. KC came away with the first game, which ended with a score of 1-0, but Newark came storming back, winning the second game 6-4. Moving back to New Jersey, there are a number of short articles and snippets. A meeting of the Committee on the Firemen's Parade has been called by Chairman Frank Gordon to take place tonight at the South Amboy City Hall. Apparently, a dozen or more local Italians have headed to the Italian consulate in New York and signed papers agreeing to fight for Italy if their services are needed. Samuel Carafa, a barber from Smith Street, and John Pico, a street fruit vendor, also from Smith Street, both unmarried, returned from New York after signing their papers and reported a long line of Italians waiting to do the same. It is noted that those volunteering may not be needed, quote, until after Italy has been in conflict for several months, unquote. Considering the war would go on for another 3 years, I'm actually kind of curious how many of these people actually ended up going to war for Italy. Local man Arthur C. Sofield has returned from a trip to New England where he traveled on the Lehigh Valley tug Perth Amboy on his first trip through the Cape Cod Canal. Mr. Sofield is a member of the Board of Harbor Commissioners. The Union County suffragists will hold a rally at the Empire Theater in Rahway tonight. Beginning at 8 p.m., the meeting will feature Dr. Anna Howard Shaw and other prominent national suffrage workers. 2 men were seriously injured in Wayne, New Jersey on Saturday morning when an explosion occurred at the E.I. DuPont Powder Works. It is supposed that lightning hit the building, touching off a ton of black powder stored in the mill. And finally, some sad news from Helmetta, New Jersey. Funeral services were held yesterday afternoon for Sophia Wadkowski, the young daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Wadkowski, who died of burns she sustained when the carriage she was sleeping in caught fire. Services were conducted in the Holy Trinity Roman Catholic Church by the Reverend Victor Milnarski. Many people attended. Interment was in the St. James Catholic Cemetery in Jamesburg. And shifting tones again, the last part of page 3 is dedicated to the quote-unquote fads of the summer girl. There's a picture of a fashionable young lady and a description of what clothes are in style this summer. We're told that broad striped blouses, skirts with pockets, and large dashing belts of black patent and white kid leather, paired with bracelets made from strands of friendship slides strung on narrow ribbons, are among the popular fads this summer. We are also told that one's shoes should be, quote, black and white or black in colors other than white, unquote. Garden dresses with wide floppy brimmed hats and bags made from flowered cotton, all the better if the hats are self-made, are, quote, the latest and prettiest of all the fads of the happy-hearted girls of today, unquote. And that concludes a roller coaster of page 3. Let's roll on over to page 4. Page 4 starts right off with social doings, which, as the name implies, is the social news from around Perth Amboy. First off, we're told that tickets are now being sold for the annual Baptist Sunday School excursion up the Hudson River to Bear Mountain. The event will take place on Friday, July 23rd, and participants will take the quote-unquote commodious iron steamboat Sirius from Perth Amboy at 9 a.m. on that day and head up the Hudson. Tickets are being sold in Perth Amboy, Tottenville, and Metuchen. No unaccompanied children are allowed. Mr. and Mrs. William Emmons of 153 Gordon Street celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary on Saturday night with a party at their home. Refreshments were served, games were played, and, quote, many solos were rendered by the guests, unquote. Miss Rose Cheshansky, valedictorian of the 1915 class of Perth Amboy High School, was awarded a prize for elocution. It was the first year that the prize was awarded and will be known as the Mrs. Florence Kitchell Prize, after the late former supervisor of elocution in the local schools. Mr. and Mrs. Franz Russler donated a gold medal, and Dr. Francis W. Kitchell donated $10 in gold for the prize. Children of the day nursery school at the Danish Lutheran Church will be visited by representatives of the Montalvo studio, who will put on a phonographic recital, meaning they're going to play some records for the kids on a phonograph. Mr. and Mrs. Meyer Karkas have announced the engagement of their daughter, Miss Bessie Karkas, to Alexander Kosine. Mr. Kosine is a prominent young real estate and insurance broker and is a member of the YMHA, that's the Young Men's Hebrew Association, and Miss Karkas is a popular and well-known member of the YWHA, of course, the Young Women's Hebrew Association. Miss Mabel Main, daughter of School Commissioner and Mrs. Victor Main, will become the bride of Mr. Clarence Wright tonight. The ceremony will be performed at the home of the bride, 147 Market Street. The wedding of Miss Helen Louise Van Schoik to William Edward Preston of South Amboy will be solemnized at 3:30 this afternoon at the home of the bride's parents, 70 High Street. And in further nuptial news, marriage licenses have been issued for the following couples: John Otto Nelson and Marjorie Evelyn Hoagland, and Stephen Bordenar and Sophia Urban. And finally, for the social doings, is a connection of the little social snippets, a sample of which include that Fire Chief and Mrs. Frank Tooker are the proud parents of a new baby daughter. Fred Bonnet of the YMCA spent yesterday at Camp Neverhome in Highland Beach. And Mrs. Elizabeth Seaman and Teresa Marsh of Rector Street motored to Lake Hopatcong yesterday. Moving on to other local news stories. We are informed that Max Scott, Philip Levine, Louis Y. Sosin, A. Beckhoff, S. Brody, and Dr. M. Romanoff are the delegates from the B'nai Zion Camp number 20 of Perth Amboy, who are attending the annual convention of the Sons of Zion in Boston, which is under session as of publication. Miss Hilda Brody and Mrs. Harry Kotler are representing the Ladies Chapter Hadassah, which is also in session in Boston. Apparently, Massachusetts Governor David I. Walsh addressed the over 1,200 delegates at the convention, which the paper calls, quote, one of the greatest in the history of Zionists in this country, unquote. U.S. Supreme Court Justice and President of the American Federation of Zionists, Louis D. Brandeis, opened the meeting. And this was at a time when the Zionist movement was gaining a lot of traction in the U.S., which had begun mostly as a fringe movement in the U.S. up until the early 1900s. The cantata God is Our Hope and Our Strength was presented at the First Presbyterian Church, quote, by its talented choir assisted by guest singers, unquote. Miss Susie Dixon presided at the organ, Fred Briggs acted as conductor, Homer Moe, who apparently possesses a fine baritone voice, took the solo, Mrs. Samuel J. Mason played the piano part, and the quartet was made up of Miss Marguerite Boughton, soprano, Miss Edith Crowell, contralto, George Griswold, tenor, and Alfred Anderson, bass. Secret Service agents have wrapped up their work in Perth Amboy. These men from the Internal Revenue Department, and the Secret Service was part of the Treasury Department until 2003, were in town visiting different saloons, quote, to ascertain if there were any evasions of the federal tax statutes, including the war tax enacted by Congress last year, unquote. The agents had previously visited New Brunswick for the same purpose. The agents' investigating technique is described thus. The plainclothesmen enter drinking places as ordinary citizens, buy bottles of liquor, and then depart without disclosing their identity. If the container has not the proper revenue stamp, the proprietor of the place is then summoned before a United States commissioner. However, an officer from the Perth Amboy Liquor Dealers Association stated that, to his knowledge, no evasions had been found in the course of the investigation. The school board will meet this afternoon, likely to discuss asking for an additional appropriation of $2,500, or about $82,430 these days, to meet estimated expenses. According to the books of the school department, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, the school system is about $2,300 or $75,836 today, short of meeting expenses. It's estimated that maintenance of the public schools for the next year, starting July 1st, will cost about $126,000, and that's about $4.15 million in 2026. Mrs. Mugford of 598 Elizabeth Street received minor injuries when she fell down the steps of Simpson Methodist Episcopal Church after the Saturday evening service. Mrs. Mugford has apparently not been feeling well lately and was stricken with a dizzy spell that caused her to catch her foot on the top step. She was taken to the home of George W. Parison and later to her own home in a taxi cab. This morning, Mrs. Mugford reports that she is somewhat improved, but still suffering from the shock and a strained side. County Clerk Bernard M. Gannon was bid farewell by quote-unquote prominent Democratic office holders of the city. Clerk Gannon is headed out on a 6-week-long trip to San Francisco, accompanied by his son Jack and his daughter Catherine. The Gannons will first travel to Middletown, New York to visit relatives before returning to New York City, where they will board a cross-country train on the Pennsylvania line. After attending an exhibition in San Francisco, the family will travel to Seattle and then head back through the Canadian Rockies for their trip home. Apparently, local fraternal organizations are preparing floats for, quote, the Big State Street Mardi Gras to be held next Monday night, unquote. I'm assuming that they're just using the term Mardi Gras to refer to a big pageant-like parade, since Mardi Gras is the day before Lent, and that's never in early July. There will be prizes awarded for the best floats, as well as the best and most interesting costumed characters. The parade will be led by the State Street Italian Band as an escort for the young woman who is to be named as Queen. Unfortunately, we are informed of the death of Andrew Henry, aged 31 years, who passed away on Sunday afternoon at the home of his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Henry, who live at 289A Smith Street. Mr. Henry was a member of the Po-Ambo Tribe No. 65 Improved Order of Red Men, the Carpenters and Joiners Local Union, the Eagle and Hose Chemical Company, which was a name used by several volunteer fire companies around the area, and the Exempt Firemen's Association. Funeral services will be held Thursday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Interment will be in the Alpine Cemetery. And finally, there's a few classified ads which were, quote-unquote, received too late for classification. A baby carriage is for sale at 172 First Street. Someone is looking for their red sweater, which disappeared from the carnival on Saturday night. It should be returned to 594 Elizabeth Street if found. And a girl, quote, white or colored, unquote, is wanted for general housework. Applicants should apply with Mrs. E.C. Yeats, LeGrand Avenue, Metuchen. And with that, we come to the end of page 4, and we will continue our march through the evening news on page 5. Page 5 has a lot more space dedicated to ads than the previous page, but there are certainly news items as well. The main article of the page is titled, "Enjoy Big Event at Boynton Beach. Park National Bank employees having outing and athletic events at popular resort." The article starts out by saying that, quote, "The residents of Sawarren and vicinity were greatly interested Saturday afternoon when a special train pulled into the Boynton Beach siding, and about 140 fine-looking young men and 10 attractive young women wearing blue and gold badges alighted and proceeded toward the beach." These fine-looking and attractive people, it turns out, were members of the Park Bank Club of New York, an athletic organization for employees of the Park National Bank. The Evening News notes that the current president of the club is W.T. Ames, who has worked at the bank since graduating from Woodbridge High School in 1887. The members of the club were apparently guests of Mr. Ames, and throughout the day participated in various foot races, relay races, potato sack races, a three-legged race, and a baseball game in which the single men absolutely obliterated the married men by a score of 28-0. Cavallo's orchestra entertained the group for dinner, which was served under the direction of Charles P. Ware, manager of the Boynton Beach Resort. The menu for the evening is given as clam chowder, olives, pickles, radishes, cold roast chicken, rare roast beef, baked ham, corned beef, potato salad, rolls, hot biscuits, Mrs. Coleman's famous crullers, coffee, ice cream, and cakes made by Mrs. Ames. Boxes of bonbons were presented to the ladies and cigars to the men, just the thing after a day of physical exercise. Then we've got a few New Jersey news items. In Newton, Henry Durling of Spring Street claims that he owns a chicken that lays eggs each morning with the initials of the family marked on each one. Apparently, Mr. Durling had been painting his automobile and, as part of the scraping process, removed his initials from the side of the car. It seems the chicken, named Topsy, then picked up the initials HD and swallowed them. 3 days later, Mr. Durling says he found an egg in the henhouse with the letter H stamped on it. A few days after that, he was rewarded with another egg, this time with the letters HD inscribed on it. However, I do think HD's story is a load of BS. It seems the Catholic Diocese of Newark are against the quote-unquote modern dances. Bishop John J. O'Connor has forbade the publication of, quote, parish affairs at which dancing is to be allowed, unquote. And the Reverend John F. Boylan, rector of Our Lady of the Valley Church, advised parishioners to, quote, warn your daughters against these dances, unquote. The paper reports that Thomas Edison has invented a new lamp to be used by firemen. The invention is reportedly in response to a fire at Edison's plant last December in which firefighters were unable to see through the smoke. The device is described as a powerful electric lamp fed by a battery strapped to the fireman's back, and the lamp itself is attached to the front of the helmet. In Montclair, prohibitionists are awaiting a town council decision on whether or not to renew the licenses of 8 saloons in the city. The council is said to be about equally divided on the question. We've also got a bit more international news. In a dispatch out of Amsterdam, it's reported that the German Empress Augusta Victoria was visiting a military hospital and, quote, sympathized with a wounded soldier and told him he was fighting for his fatherland, unquote. Apparently, the man replied that he wished that the royal family could exchange places with him, upon which the Empress fainted. I feel like this story is of dubious authenticity, but amusing nonetheless. We've also got a couple short items from Italy. Nabi Bey, the Turkish ambassador to Italy, has demanded that he be given his passports and allowed to leave the country, as although Turkey is allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, no formal declaration of war has been issued between Italy and Turkey. The Contessa Constance Gianotti, wife of Conte Cesare Gianotti, has died. The British and French governments have reached an agreement in which France will send a limited number of animal hides to Britain in exchange for leather goods. And also in France, it was announced that the observance of Bastille Day on July 14th will not include a review of the troops of the Paris garrison. Obviously, this is due to the ongoing war. Finally, we've got a weather forecast. Fair today and tomorrow, warmer on the coast, light north to northeast winds. And with that extremely vague weather report, we do come to the end of page 5 and will proceed on to page 6. On the first column of page 6, we've got the business information for the evening news, meaning it lists the paper's address, editor, cost of subscription, things like that. Then the paper gives us some information on Perth Amboy itself. Some of it we've already covered, like the population and distance from New York City, but we also learn that, among other things, Perth Amboy boasts 4 different railroads, 2 telegraph and 2 telephone companies, 10 grammar schools, a high school, 4 parochial schools, and a business college, the richest clay deposits in the entire country, apparently. And then there's a large list of firms from various industries, such as the American Smelting and Refining Company, 3 plants of the National Fireproofing Company, 2 dry docks for shipbuilding and repair, and Castle's ice cream plant. After that is a couple of editorial pieces, the first titled Drastic Action Necessary. The editors of the Evening News are appalled that the municipality of South Amboy is refusing to fix up and otherwise modernize the road leading to the southern point of the bridge over the Raritan River, which separates Perth and South Amboy. The writer believes the condition of the approach to the bridge in South Amboy is a humiliation, not just to South Amboy, but to Middlesex County and the entire state of New Jersey. The titular drastic action that the paper deems necessary is that Middlesex County and even the State Roads Department should withhold funds from South Amboy until the city decides to have some pride in itself and fix up the road. The next editorial is titled Secretary Daniels' Optimism. Basically, the editors of the Evening News are kind of chastising Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels for being a bit self-congratulatory in remarks made about the strength and size of the U.S. Navy, and in particular the number of battleships constructed in the states lately. The paper points out that the only reason a record number of battleships were built in the last year is because 2 battleships had been sold to Greece and had to be replaced. They also note that Secretary Daniels recently boasted about the battleship Alabama being made ready and dispatched in 48 hours, but he left out, however, that this required the crews of pretty much every other reserve vessel to be sent to the Alabama. The editorial also mentions the recent poor performance of American submarines during war games exercises, and this is presented as evidence that maybe Secretary Daniels should temper his enthusiasm a little bit. Moving on, there is an article carrying the title, Insect Germ Carriers, Roaches, Ants, and even Bees are now regarded with distrust. What do you mean roaches are now regarded with distrust? I hope people weren't just loving on roaches before then. I don't think they were. But the article talks about how the apparently recent scientific discoveries that indicate that diseases such as malaria, yellow fever, and bubonic plague, as well as sleeping sickness, are found to be transmitted by insects. And if you're curious about why bees are included with cockroaches and ants, the hypothesis put forth in the article is that bees have been observed collecting material in, quote, collections of garbage in the canal zone, unquote. The idea being that any bacteria or whatever like that the bees pick up could be transmitted to the honey that the bees will eventually make. I don't know how scientifically accurate that last part is, but obviously we do know that insects carry disease. And aside from a little blurb claiming that the temperature in Muscat, the capital of Oman, can reach 189 degrees in the sun, which is definitely wrong, that's going to be it for page 6. Again, a lot of ads on the page and a cartoon, which can be seen on the YouTube version of this episode. So with that, let us wend our way over to page 7. And the entirety of page 7 is titled Daily Happenings in Middlesex and Monmouth Counties. As the name suggests, we've got articles about various events, weddings, other social bits. One of the first big events we're told about is the Sawarn Civic Association's upcoming July 4th picnic. The festivities will be held on the grounds behind the central station from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Miss Stoddart and Miss Ruth Freeman are in charge of the various games for the girls, and the boys will be entertained by C.M. Cooper and Oswald Higgins. It's also noted that Misters Cooper and Higgins have recently formed, quote, a branch of the U.S. Scouts to include boys of Seawarren, Port Redding, and Boynton Beach, unquote. 17 local boys have already enrolled in the troop, and the Campfire Girls and Bluebirds have been formed under Miss Ruth Freeman, with 19 girls having already enrolled in these programs. If you were unaware, the Campfire Girls, which still exists as a co-ed organization, was originally founded in 1910 as a sister organization to the Boy Scouts. And the Bluebirds was part of the Campfire Girls group for younger girls, so like elementary school, basically akin to the Cub Scouts. In Keyport, St. Mary's Episcopal Church recently held a quote-unquote a most original affair for the men of the parish. This was a dinner cooked by the men themselves, who were apparently all donned in white aprons and chef caps. The food was served without knives, forks, or napkins. About 25 men were present and heard an address from the Reverend F.W. Clark on the topic of foreign mission work. Also discussed was the duplex envelope system, which refers to a new advancement in the field of financial contributions, which basically consisted of an envelope with 2 pockets, so one could donate different amounts to different causes. So, for example, with a church, one pocket might be for funds for charitable outreach, and the other might be for church upkeep or something like that. Also discussed was the church beginning a canvass of every member of the church in the interest of increasing church membership. A wedding is given a major headline. Miss Layton is Red Bank bride. Popular Red Bank girl married to Joseph Bublin. Reception follows wedding. At a beautiful wedding Saturday night at the St. James Church, Miss Grace Madeline Layton of Red Bank became the bride of Joseph Bublin, formerly of Matawan. The ceremony was performed by the Reverend Joseph Casey. The bride was attired in a gown of pale blue crepe de chine and a white hat and carried a bouquet of white roses. Mrs. William Carney of Matawan was matron of honor, wearing a dark blue crepe de chine and carried a bouquet of pink roses. William Carney himself was the groomsman, and the bride's mother wore a gown of black charmeuse. The reception for about 150 guests was held at the home of the bride's parents. The house was decorated with pink and white roses. The groom's parents, quote, are well known hereabouts and are receiving many well wishes from their many friends in Matawan, unquote. The Keyport Literary Club held their last meeting of the season at the public library on Friday afternoon, hosted by club president Mrs. J.P. Bauer. Various reports were given on the status of the club, including that the club's treasury stood at $710.65, amounting to $23,432.41 in 2026. Throughout the season, the club held 19 meetings with an average attendance of 21 members. Mrs. Bronner, Sands, and Walling haven't missed a single meeting. The club lost one beloved member, Mrs. A. Stillwell Van Buskirk, and 3 new members were admitted. No resignations were received for the year. Piano performances were then given by Miss Lydia Tyler and Miss Lola Wood, accompanied by vocalist Mrs. William Danforth. Mrs. Harvey S. Bedell and Mrs. Harvey Bronner gave humorous recitations. The South Amboy High School class of 1915 finished out their high school careers with a round of social events, including a dance on Friday night and a party on Saturday night at the home of Clarence Thorpe, a member of the graduating class. And on the topic of South Amboy High School, former New Jersey Governor Edward C. Stokes has clarified that in his commencement address, his remarks about Pudd'nhead Wilson's definition of education was a reference to the titular lawyer in Mark Twain's novel Pudd'nhead Wilson, and not a slighting reference at President Woodrow Wilson. And then we've got the social snippets. They are broken up by city. There's a lot of them, so I'm just going to read out a few from each town, and starting with South Amboy. Mrs. Mary Baker, who has been ill for some time, was taken to the home of her daughter in Yonkers, New York. R.P. Mason Jr. took her in the limousine of Mayor Garrettson on Friday. The trustees of the Baptist Church are making improvements to their church property by putting up a new fence. Miss Martha Carlson of Cranberry was a visitor in South Amboy on Thursday and Friday, and members of St. Mary's Parish will hold their annual lawn festival on the grounds adjoining the rectory on Augusta Street on the nights of July 14th, 15th, and 16th. And in Keyport, Melva Dahl Winterton, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harry Winterton, was operated on for removal of tonsils and adenoids on Thursday morning at the office of Dr. S.H. Cassidy, who was assisted by Dr. A. Peetler. Mr. and Mrs. William Edmonds are the parents of a baby girl. Mrs. Edmonds was formerly Miss Georgiana Lloyd of Brooklyn. Miss Vera Conover was a visitor with friends in New York on Friday. Miss Conover expects to spend some time camping on Long Island with this party of friends. Percy Crawford was initiated into the secrets of the Royal Arcanum Lodge at their recent meeting. This meeting actually has its own little article noting that about 60 members and guests attended, and the organization is making plans for a picnic and shore dinner to be held at Sidler's Beach in August. Additionally, the St. John's Methodist Episcopal Church will hold their annual bazaar and supper at the church grounds on Wednesday, June 30th. In Jamesburg, Louis Seminara has filled in his sidewalk on both sides of his store property. That makes that walk high and dry in the wet weather, and he has also put in heavy wooden curbing. Mr. and Mrs. John C. Colleen of the State Home have received word of the birth of a son to their daughter, Mrs. W.E. Hensley of Chattanooga, Tennessee. The grandparents were so overjoyed that the youngster was rewarded with a check for $500 as a nest egg. And that's almost $16,500 these days, so, not too shabby. James Hampton is converting the barn on his property to a commodious woodshed. Their son Earl is doing the job in a creditable manner. In Port Reading, Police Officer Krause is enjoying 10 days vacation. Officer Samuel Lloyd is patrolling the Port Reading beat until Officer Krause returns. Miss Catherine Everett of Woodbridge spent Thursday with her sister, Mrs. Joseph Ruth, on the Blair Road. And John McNulty had several young chickens killed by the early morning paper train on Thursday morning. In Sawarren, Maximilian Schmitz of New York is spending the summer at Miss Clara Acker's. Mr. and Mrs. Doherty and family are to spend the summer in Sawarren. Their many friends will be delighted to welcome them, as they feared it would be impossible for them to find a house. Miss Marie Demarest attended a dance at the Westfield High School on Friday night. And finally, at the card party held at the Land and Water Club on Friday, Mrs. L.F. Ballard won first prize, a dress pattern. Mrs. F.H. Turner came in second and won a lawn collar, and that's a dress collar made from lawn cloth. Roger Gimbernat won the men's first prize, a pair of gloves, and Bayard Clarkson took second prize, which was a pair of silk socks. In Old Bridge, Harold Appleby of Trenton spent Saturday and Sunday with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Albert Appleby. Miss Clara Hendrickson and mother spent Saturday afternoon in Perth Amboy, and Roland Skillman of Trenton spent the weekend with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Skillman. In Woodbridge, Mr. and Mrs. Ellis of Tottenville were the guests of Mr. and Mrs. F.R. Valentine on Sunday. Mrs. S.B. Hinsdale and Miss Edith Hinsdale were guests of their cousins, the Mrs. Carpenter of Brooklyn, on Sunday. And the many friends of Mrs. A.W. King of New Brunswick will be glad to hear that she is improving quite rapidly from her recent severe illness. Finally, in Ellendale Terrace, Mrs. Wenzel J. Wolney and sons, Roy and Alton, were Perth Amboy visitors on Wednesday afternoon. Leo Dressler was an out-of-town visitor on Wednesday night, and Mrs. Whitner visited friends in Ford on Sunday. There's also a number of humorous little quotes and snippets sprinkled throughout the page, including this one that I kind of enjoyed. Where do you find the most miserable of men? You don't have to find him. He'll hunt you down and tell you all about it. And with that, we'll finish up page 7 and progress steadily on to page 8. Page 8 appears to be about half various news items, both local and national, and about half classified ads. The first article, titled Brian in Denial of Dumba Stories. Former Secretary of State says he did not minimize Lusitania note. This is referring to William Jennings Bryan, who had tendered his resignation as Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State on June 8th, as a direct result of Wilson's stance that Germany was wholly responsible for the lives taken in the sinking of the Lusitania. And what happened was, after President Wilson sent his first note to the Germans in the wake of the sinking, in which he took a hard stance on Germany's responsibility for the civilian deaths, it was reported that Secretary Bryan had told Austro-Hungarian Ambassador Konstantin Dumba that the note was basically just to placate the American public and that its sharp tone should be disregarded. These sentiments were, of course, passed by the ambassador on to German leadership, which would obviously frustrate Wilson's attempts to take a hard line against unrestricted submarine warfare. As of printing, of course, Bryan had already resigned his position, though he defended himself by saying that his remarks had been misinterpreted by the ambassador, and that he, Bryan, held another meeting with Ambassador Dumba, clarifying his remarks, and, quote, secured from him a statement certifying to the correctness of the report of the conversation which I had made to the president, unquote. Bryan's official statement basically saying that his correction was sent by Dumba to the German government. Of course, since these were private conversations, I don't know if it's ever been confirmed one way or another if the allegations against Bryan were accurate, but regardless, Wilson's subsequent notes to the Germans were too provocative for Bryan's taste, and he did resign. In local news, a, quote, motor-drawn fire apparatus with pump attached, unquote, aka a fire truck, which was ordered by the McClellan Engine Company, headquartered at State Street and Pearl Place, is scheduled to be delivered on August 1st. The apparatus had been scheduled to be delivered on June 1st, but delivery had been delayed due to the desire to install a special attachment on the pump. The paper doesn't say what the attachment was or what it did, but, quote, when the apparatus is delivered, the city will be equipped with one of the finest and most modern pieces of firefighting machinery in the country, unquote. It appears this is the first step in replacing the city's horse-drawn fire engines with motor-powered vehicles. Mayor Fred Gerritsen will be representing Perth Amboy at the next hearing of the Commission for the Survey of Municipal Financing to be held in Plainfield, New Jersey at 9 p.m. on Tuesday, June 29th. And finally, although he has 5 perforations in the intestines caused by bullets shot at a distance of only 8 feet, Patsy Granata, the Keyport farmer who was attacked Thursday night by Joe Roma, whom he caught in the act of stealing asparagus, is still alive in St. Peter's Hospital, New Brunswick. No hope is entertained for his recovery, however, and the fact that the wounded man has held life so long is amazing to the physicians who are attending him. And after that, most of the page is classified ads, which I often actually kind of find to be an interesting little look into life back then, so I'll read out some of them. For real estate, there's a highlighted ad for a 6-room house on Maple Street between Smith and Market Street for $4,000, all improvements, to a quick buyer. That would be about $131,900 these days, and good luck finding a house anywhere in New Jersey for that in 2026. There's also a 2-family house on McClellan Street being sold for $4,800 or around $158,300 these days, but there's also an option to rent for $44 a month, and that's just about $1,450 today. There's a number of other ads for houses to let, but no prices are included, which is a little odd, but maybe those owners were more open to negotiating the rent. There are some flats to let, so like apartments, including 6 rooms, all improvements, $15 a month. That's about $495 these days. Inquire to Mrs. Healy, 228 Broadway, Tottenville, Staten Island. And then there's one for 4 rooms at 46 Commerce Street for $8 a month. That's about $264 today. There are a number of situation-wanted ads, meaning that's people advertising that they're open to work, so kind of like the LinkedIn of its day. In one of them, a young lady wishes a position as an office assistant. She will furnish references. Helen Schultz of 375 Elm Street would like a position to assist with general housework. And a man, initials JK of 377 Smith Street, is looking for a position as a chauffeur. He boasts 10 years of experience, will do his own repairing, and will furnish the best of references. Of course, there are also plenty of help wanted ads. For example, Jacob Rosenblum is looking for experienced girls to sew on machines in his shop. A girl is wanted as a waitress of a New York restaurant. They can inquire at 219 Smith Street. The Colonial Life Insurance Company is looking for a man that speaks Polish or Hungarian to canvass for them. They boast good wages if you're a hustler. And able-bodied men are wanted by a railway to work as firemen, who work on the train engine boiler, and brakemen, who are responsible for helping to stop the train, checking couplings, signaling during switching operations, that sort of thing. They are offering $120 a month, so that's close to $4,000 a month in 2026. No experience is necessary. And then there's a number of kind of miscellaneous ads, including this one for a rowboat, which was found adrift in Princess Bay. The owner can inquire at William Walters Boathouse at the foot of Market Street. A lightly used piano is for sale for $350. That's about $11,500 these days. A 22-foot, two-cylinder engine motorboat is being sold for $700. That's about $23,000 today. And interestingly, another person has posted an ad saying that they want a motorboat, but for a low price. They're offering to pay cash. I have no idea what a good price for a motorboat would have been in 1915, so maybe the one listed in the paper is too expensive for the person who wants to buy one. And that's it for page 8 of the Perth Amboy Evening News. Let us keep going on to page 9. And page 9 is the sports page. There is a comic strip at the top of the page, though, about a guy that forgets that he's married when buying a train ticket. If you watch the YouTube version, you'll see it. But the rest of the page is sports news, and most of that is baseball. I feel like most people might kind of figure this from pop culture, but there is really no understating just how popular baseball was in the late 1800s through the mid 20th century. And to really drive that home, this page isn't even about Major League Baseball. We've already covered those scores. No, this page is about all the semi-pro and amateur teams in the local area. I mean, back in the day, it seemed like pretty much every town had at least one semi-pro team or independent team, often more, because even employers would put together their own baseball teams. And starting off, we've got the headline, Pacers whitewash crack Suburban 9. The Perth Amboy Pacers beat the Brooklyn Suburbans 2-0 on the back of pitcher Cliff Randolph's no-hitter. The Pacers' first run came in the first inning when Whitey Schrage rapped a single to center field. Ruddy, the right fielder, no first name given, was walked, and when Amboy's shortstop Schufelt beat a long single to right center, Schrage scored. Run number 2 came in the second inning when Perth Amboy's center fielder Blackie Regan, who'd gotten on base with a clean single to center, first made it to second on an error made by Brooklyn's first baseman Schneider, then across home off of left fielder Mickey Lozer's single against the short right field fence. Whitey and Blackie actually scored 2 more runs in the top of the 7th, but a rainstorm then rolled in, the game was called, and the score reverted to the end of the 6th. Regardless, the Pacers were jubilant over their victory, and the team and their families, as well as manager Billy Pfau, headed to the Palace Theater in New York to celebrate the win. There was a major upset in the Factory League over the weekend when the Standard Underground Cable Works team trounced the league-leading Raritan Copper Works by a score of 4-1. Cable Works pitcher Spike Olson gave up 6 hits, but apparently the Copper Workers couldn't do much with the hits they did get. In fact, Copper Works pitchers Ritter and Applegate only gave up 4 hits, but the RCW fielders made a number of errors which, quote, set up a new condition of affairs in the Factory League, unquote. In further Factory League play, the United Lead Company let fly on the Cheeseboro Manufacturing Company team, annihilating the Vaseline Workers with a score of 13-2. I love the language in these articles. Quote, the Vaseline Workers hopelessly outclassed, collected but 2 hits, while the victors batted out 17 bingles, unquote. They also tend to refer to pitchers here as twirlers, which is amusing to me. As for the local athletic associations, the St. Anthony's allowed the Knights of St. Peter of New Brunswick team only one hit and won the game, called in the 8th inning due to rain, by a final score of 2-0. Both sides performed well, though, with the St. Peter's quote-unquote diminutive twirler Jackie Hayes only allowing 4 hits, and it was only down to an error by St. Peter third baseman Holman that allowed St. Anthony to score at all. In the meantime, the Perth Amboy All-Star team beat the Tottenville Athletic Club by a score of 3-1, and the Methodist Boy Scouts team of Keyport ended up tying with the Cliffwood team on Saturday with a final score of 9-9. Curiously, the paper says that in the bottom of the 9th inning, after the Keyport team brought in their relief pitcher, the Cliffwood team refused to play any further and then walked off the field. I would have thought that would count as a forfeit, but to be honest, I'm not really up on my baseball rules, let alone rules from 1915 Amateur League ball. And in non-baseball sports, the Perth Amboy Gun Club took the Silver Cup in a competition between the gun clubs of Roosevelt, New Jersey, Staten Island, and Perth Amboy. Specifically, the Amboyans trounced the West End Club of Staten Island by a final score of 195 to 167. Finally, the Perth Amboy YMCA defeated the Hudson City YMCA at a track and field meet on Saturday, nearly doubling their opponent's points with a final score of 47 to 24. Now, I'm no expert in track and field scoring at all, but from the article, it seems like Hudson City actually took first in a number of events, although when they did, it appears there were usually Amboyans in second and third place, and apparently Perth Amboy won the relay race by a half a lap. So, quote, by this remarkable win on an outdoor track, the local boys demonstrated their fitness to claim supremacy in the YMCA athletic activities of the state, unquote. And with that, we finish up with page 9 and make our own dash to the 10th and final page. So, page 10, the last page, contains some more local news items. There is one that I feel like, besides being on the last page of the paper, is quite short, and it seems to me like it should be displayed more prominently. Unfortunately, it is tragic news as well. The headline reads, 40 hurt, 5 dying after car crash. Coney Island train crashes into trolley, rush ambulances for the injured. So, per the article, 3 women and 2 men are dying and 35 others suffering various hurts following a collision when a Vanderbilt Avenue trolley car dashed around the curve on the Culver line at the Van Sicklen station just outside of Coney Island last night and into the rear of a stalled 6-car Culver line train while traveling at 40 miles an hour. Besides the 5 who probably will die, 10 others were so seriously hurt they had to be sent to their homes in ambulances and automobiles, and 20 others were treated for cuts and abrasions. So I know accidents and things like this were more common in the past, but this really does seem like something that would have been bigger news, doesn't it? Maybe it was in subsequent papers. The other major headline is a different kind of tragic. It reads, McGowan will be buried in Trenton. Son takes charge of former mayor's body. Once rich, he dies beggar in streets. So here we're told that Frank A. McGowan, the mayor of Trenton from 1887 to 1889, and who at one time was believed to have a fortune of between $3 and $5 million, that's between $100 and $165 million in 2026, died at St. Mary's Hospital in Hoboken, where he had been taken after begging a dime from a policeman on Tuesday, June 22nd. The cause of death was established as cerebral hemorrhage. The body was claimed by Donald McGowan of Trenton and will be buried in the Trenton Cemetery. Frank McGowan had amassed his fortune from rubber manufacturing, but apparently about 18 years ago, the former mayor was the target of both business and personal lawsuits that, quote, did much to break Mr. McGowan's career, unquote. After being found almost unconscious by policeman Richard Winter the previous week, the man was taken to the hospital, but it wasn't until another policeman named Glendon recalled meeting a man named McGowan, who was the former mayor of Trenton, that Police Chief Hayes of Hoboken notified Donald McGowan of Trenton, who then traveled to Hoboken and identified the unconscious man as his father. But moving on, it appears we actually weren't done with baseball news. The Olympic AC quote-unquote walloped the West Amboy FC of South Amboy by a score of 5-1. The Olympics made only one error, had 9 hits, including 3 doubles. And the Rambler Athletic Club team of Rahway, a, quote, fully uniformed team averaging about 18 years of age, unquote, is looking to book games with other clubs on Sunday or Saturday afternoons. The team will travel for suitable guarantees. They have all Saturdays and Sundays open after August 7th. For games, contact Henry Springer, 201 Main Street, Rahway. And the East Keyport Athletic Club is also looking to book games, especially for the 4th of July. And that's it for the actual news items, but there are some humorous anecdotes and little statements. I thought this one was actually kind of funny. A crafty Virginia newspaper editor threatened to publish the name of a certain young man who was seen hugging and kissing a girl in the park unless his subscription to the paper was paid up in a week. Apparently, 59 young men called and paid up the next day, 2 even paid for a year in advance. And this is just a little factual snippet. We're also told that the salary of captains of the transatlantic liners of the larger class runs from $800 to $1,200 a year, or from $4,000 to $6,000 in American money. So that's about $132,000 to $198,000 in today's American money, which is honestly, I think, a bit lower than I would have thought. I think modern cruise captains are paid around the higher end of that bracket, and even more for the real luxury ships. But I guess that does, again, say something about how certain aspects of inflation have increased at higher rates than others. And that is going to do it for the Monday, June 28th, 1915 edition of the Perth Amboy Evening News from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. If you are still listening after all that, I really appreciate it. I found a lot of the paper to be quite interesting, not least of all because I live, again, pretty close to Perth Amboy, and it's always kind of fun to read about places that you see on a regular basis and kind of see what was going on back in the day. And I hope you found it interesting as well, even if you don't live in New Jersey or Staten Island. And if you did, please consider subscribing on whatever platform you're listening on. And even though it's plenty hot outside, be wise, buy your winter's coal supply while it's still warm and save money. Our coal is way dry. John W. Olson Coal Company, Barrerand Avenue at the Car Barn, phone 336. Thank you so much for listening to Past and Printed. I've been your host, Lloyd, and I hope your next news is all good news.